What is home environmental medicine? Why should you care? Watch today's episode and find out. Okay, I want to introduce a new paradigm of the healthcare industry I call home environmental medicine. Home environmental medicine is basically when you have an indoor environment, there is activity in that space that is visible and invisible that will affect the chemical releases in your brain that will either cause stress in the body or eliminate stress in the body. So home environmental medicine is an application that I created so that I can actually use the physical space of a person's home to relieve stress triggers in the brain and help them to recover. One of my main focuses of interest in home recovery is the bedroom. If a person does not get a good night's sleep and they don't go into REM phase of sleep, the body will not recover. So my general focus is on what are the hindrances to a person actually falling into sleep and sleeping through the night. One of the factors could be, for example, particulate matter, otherwise known as dust. Dust can impede your respiratory system. It can cause nose runs. It could cause coughing and gagging. And these things can be a hindrance to your ability to actually sleep, even though you may not be aware of it. Once an air purification process has been taken place, you will notice a difference in your ability to breathe and also in your ability to sleep. Light wave energy is vital to the function of the immune system and also vital to the function of the human brain. And there can be disruptors to the light access that you can get inside your home. So for example, if you have dirty windows, your windows haven't been cleaned, what it does is it actually blocks some of the light from entering into your home. There's a syndrome called SAD. It's seasonal affective disorder, which actually is caused by lack of sunlight exposure, specifically ultraviolet light, which actually governs the immune system and all of the circulatory systems in the body. So if you deprive a person of that actual wave light of energy, you will actually impede their progress and their opportunity to actually recover. So light wave frequency is very important, and the reason why intensive cleaning is vital to home environmental medicine is because particulate matter can actually cover surfaces that can bounce light and reflect light. So if you have, for example, a home that has not been cleaned for maybe 20 days or maybe 20 years, you're going to have accumulation of particulate matter that's going to cover the surfaces that light needs to bounce off of or light needs to transmit through. Another thing that you want to consider with home environmental medicine is the usage of poisons in the house. These poisons will produce a residual dust that will actually remain in the house. And so if you spray for ants or you spray for roaches, you spray for spiders, you have to at some point address the poison that is now part of your air. So when we look at particles in your home that may come from tobacco products, it may be coming from pesticides. These things are not supposed to be inside of your body, and once they enter in your body, there's no guarantee that the filters in your system are going to be able to eliminate them. Now, when we talk about filters in home environmental medicine, many of us have filters on our air handling systems, and we change those filters regularly because we know that they're trapping particles that are floating in the dust. Our human lungs, and we have cilia in our neck and also dust hairs, should I say hairs in our nose, they act as filters to the dust, but there are also particles in our environment that can actually bypass those filters. And when we talk about fine particulate matter, the tinier the particles are, the more dangerous they are to your body because oftentimes they can bypass the filters and end up damaging your cells. So if the particles are small enough to float in the air and you breathe them in, they enter into your bloodstream, they can translocate to any part of your body, and that's going to cause cancer. What will happen is the cells that surround that particular organ where that particle is will start to die as a result of this particle being there. Now, it could be a particle that may be non-toxic. It can also be a particle that is very toxic, which is, as I would call, a double whammy. So you have situations where you have particles that can be airborne that are not toxic, but they can get stuck in the body and cause damage. In this episode, we just scratched the surface of some of the things I'll be covering in this series. And if you're a person who is providing care for a loved one in their home, there's a lot of things that are being missed that are actually impacting their health and their ability to live a happy, healthy life inside their home. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and I can't wait to help you live an incredible life. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below, and we'd be glad to help you. Are you an in-home care provider and you're trying to provide care inside of a contaminated house? Find out more in today's episode. Today I'm going to talk about the in-home outpatient rehabilitation system gap. Over the years, providing cleaning services for patients in the residential sector, I discovered that there was a gap in the in-home outpatient recovery system. The gap was actually the house. So here's what's been going on. A person may be sick in their home for years or sick in their home for months, and they're shut in. No one's talking to them because they're not maybe socializing them much. Maybe their relatives are out of state, or maybe they have no children who are close by. The neighbors haven't checked on them. The house is becoming a toxic trap. Traditionally, what happens is they're taken to a hospital environment and there's governance over that environment in terms of germ control, dust count, and the doctors are required to scrub in. They basically will oversee the cleanliness and healthiness of that environment. Now, when that patient is discharged from the hospital, they're going right back into a contaminated home, and there's no governance over your private home. I'll give you an example. You have people who may be smoking inside their home. Okay, particulate matter from tobacco products will stick to all the surfaces inside the interior. Oftentimes, I'll walk into a home where there has been smoking taking place, and maybe the person who was the resident is in the hospital right now because they have emphysema. And what would happen is I would get a call from the family and they would say, well, we know we can't send him back to that home the way it is because it's going to kill him right away. So this is a problem with the healthcare recovery system because it puts a burden on everyone actually. The house puts a burden on the patient's recovery, it puts a burden on the caregiver. It also puts a burden on the hospital because when that person gets lung infections because they have particulate matter dust all throughout their house, and now it's in their blood, it's in their lungs, and now they're going back to the emergency room. And so what you have is this back and forth to and from the hospital, and it's directly related to the contamination that they're ingesting in their home. And that's basically where I come in. I'm actually the gap closer. I've talked to one caregiver in the early stages of my involvement with the recovery process where one of the nurses was caring for one of my clients whose husband actually suffered from a stroke. And because they were my clients before he had the stroke, I was able to maintain that house in a healthy condition. So when the nurse came in, she complimented the house. And so one of the things I like to point out to the caregivers that they can do when they go to evaluate a home that they're going to work in, take a look around and look up. Look up, look down, look under the bed. If the client's bed has dust under the bed, then guess what? The home is contaminated. That means the dust has been there long enough to accumulate under the bed. And if you look up into the ceiling, you look into the light fixtures and you see sometimes the lights are mounted on the ceiling and you'll see it collected with dust. That means that the air pollution in that home has risen to the ceiling often as enough times that now it has now accumulated in the light fixture. The other thing that I advise nurses to do is just walk over to the wall and lean your shoulder onto the wall. Put your head next to the wall and just look down the wall. And what you'll see, what you may find, is you may find dust particles that are actually stuck to the wall. Okay, so if the particles are sticking to the wall, that means there's something going on inside that space that is not going to be good for human habitation. One other thing I want to mention, if you have a patient and the patient is incontinent and they're leaking on the sofa, they're leaking also on the carpet, they're leaking in the bathroom, they're leaking on the floor, this becomes a trigger to a neurological activity in your brain, and you will smell it, and that will send an alert that you are in a dangerous environment. And if that smell continues, what's going to happen is it's going to start to erode your immune system while you're trying to provide care for the patient. You are now subject to the harshness of the environment, and it's going to reduce your focus, it's going to reduce your morality, and it's going to make it very difficult for you to provide the top of the notch care. What I generally do is I compare the way that the air smells across the threshold of the door. So I'm outside the house, I can take a deep breath of air. If I can't take the same deep breath of air when I cross the threshold, then that means there's a major difference between what's inside that environment and the outside environment. These things are going to be triggers and signs that the home is not at the optimal condition to provide medical care. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter. If you're a home health care provider, I'm here to help you live an incredible life. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. What do you need to do before you send your team in for care in an unknown environment? Find out on today's episode. This episode, I'm going to talk about the caregivers and the case managers and the calls that we get. What happens with me in my business, frequently I get a call from a case manager who has a patient who's in the hospital, and maybe the patient has already been discharged, and what happens is they send their caregiver, maybe a live-in nurse, it may be a shift worker, and they get into the home and they find out that the home is so unbearable. Maybe there's hoarding situations going on, there's all types of scum and bacteria, toxins lurking around. And what happened was I got a call from a case manager, and she told me that she had 2 caregivers and they were about to quit. They were gonna walk out. I got the call on a Thursday, and the scenario was basically, if the home doesn't get cleaned by a professional cleaner, by Saturday, they're gone by Saturday, which means that the patient is going to lose the help that they need. Now, this was a very sticky situation because what we had in that particular house, there was the mother who had dementia, and she was about 82 years old, and the daughter who was maybe about in the 30s, and she had autism. She was autistic. Both of them were hoarders, and they had a love for dogs, so there were dogs, stuffed animals all over the house. And then they had actually 2 live dogs in the house, but the dogs were in the house and the dogs were relieving themselves also in the house. So this is unacceptable in terms of care. In any environment, it's difficult for a person who is demented or a person who is autistic to be able to manage the control of a healthy environment on their own. But when you send a nurse in there to have to take care of 2 people who have mental illness, it exacerbates and complicates the likelihood that any of them will get proper care. Because what happens is the caregiver will have a tendency to not want to provide care. They feel demoralized and they end up quitting. So when I got the call, they were actually gonna leave on Saturday. So I came in to do the deep cleaning, and I'm the SOS guy. They can call me at a moment's notice, and I'll say, well, let me get out there in a day and take a look at your environment, make an assessment, and get that place healthy so that you don't lose your caregiver, and that you also don't send your caregiver home sick, because that's going to add expense to your operation. Also, you want your caregivers to be able to give adequate care to the patient, and they can't do that if they're subjected to the ills of an environment that's beyond their control. That's basically when I get a call, oftentimes it's the person who has the home environmental issue may be actually still in the hospital, and the case manager will call me and say, well, we have a patient they're going to discharge in 5 days, but the home is horrific, it's utterly deplorable. And these are their words, the home is utterly deplorable, it's horrific. We had to walk in with masks on, and it's not unusual for me to walk in with shoe covers and mask, and I also suggest that caregivers and case managers, when they walk into these environments, you have to protect yourself from the unknown. There's no way that you know what has gone on in that home, and there's no way to know what you could be picking up on your shoes, on your hands, if you're touching things, and transmitting those to back to your car, you take it back to your home, you take it to the next site. So there's certain precautionary measures that you need to take as you're going into the unknown. And every home that you go into is basically an unknown. We don't have any historical log. Also, there's no record being kept of how frequently, if they have pests and bugs, insects in the house. You have to have a strong stomach to do this, first of all, but you also have to have a passion to know that the end objective is to get that person into safety and into care. And in order for the nurses to go in and give the best possible treatment and care, that environment has to be safe for them. They should not have to worry about whether they're going to catch a disease, whether they're going to be going home sick, whether they're going to go home with something that they didn't encounter on. Anything that strikes you as not being a very happy place, a safe place for you to be in, and you get on the phone, and then that's when you call Hunter Cleaning Services, because we need to go in and make sure that that home is not going to be the source of ongoing health problems. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, so before you send your team in for treatment, make sure it's incredibly clean and safe for both your patient and for your workers. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning, so reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. Did you know your home could be harboring stress triggers in every room, corner, and cabinet in your house? Find out what they are and how they can be harming you in today's episode. This is the incredible Gregory Hunter. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about stress triggers in your interior space. Now, there are lots of different things that can contribute to stress mentally in your space, and also stress that will translate to something that's going to be internal in your body. Let's talk about, for example, odors. The brain has a physiological response to everything in your space, but in particular, when there's an unfamiliar odor or unpleasant odor in your space, your brain will have a tendency to release a chemical called adrenaline. So if you walk into a person's home and you smell, for example, gasoline, it's not supposed to be in that space, your brain will automatically trigger an alarm to let you know that you are in danger, and it will give you adrenaline to escape from the danger. Oftentimes what happens is a person who's providing care walks into a home environment that has a myriad of odors that are pungent, and what's happening inside the caregiver's brain are chemical releases. Those chemical releases will stay continuous, and they will erode the function of the immune system to the point where the person will become ill. Oftentimes they will have a pain in the back, sometimes it could be a pain in the neck, sometimes they become irritable and angry, and it's not uncommon for a person who's in a home that has foul smelling odors to become a bit edgy. So always want to pay attention to the things that are going to trigger a stress event in the body of the patient, as well as stress event in the body of the caregiver. Another item that can cause a stress trigger would be an infestation of mice, for example. I've had situations where I've gone to provide care in a home with a person who was demented, and there was an active mouse, and they had actually gotten into her burners under her stove, and it defecated throughout the whole stove. This creates what we call a traumatic experience that is coming from a visual of the damage that mice can do. So this will trigger a stress release in that caregiver. So now the caregiver is carrying stress in her mind and in her body, which also impedes her ability to provide quality care for her patient, because now she's concerned on the one hand that I'm in this place that's got all this activity going on that is not sitting well with me, and at the same time I'm supposed to be giving focused attention to a person who needs my care. Often what happens with a caregiver is a caregiver will sometimes end up having sicknesses that exceed the person who they're giving care for. We've talked about the visual, we've talked about the olfactory response, which is the odor. There's also the response that a person has to the actual dust in the air. They will have a neurological response and respiratory reflex to excessive dust in the air. Sometimes it comes in the form of a nose run. Your nose is running, or you're sneezing, you're gasping, you can't quite properly breathe. The person in need of care, we say that oftentimes they will have been in that environment for so long that they've eroded or worn out or fatigued the olfactory, which is responsible for the sense of smell. So if you're having headaches every time you go to a work site, it may not be that the aspirin is going to be sufficient to keep you from having headaches continuously. It may be that those headaches are being triggered by a physiological response in the actual environment. So I just talked about stress triggers in the interior environment that will affect your ability to provide care for a patient. These stress triggers also will provide a hindrance to the recovery of the patient. So if you're walking into an environment and your nose starts to run and you're having reactions, what you need to do is you need to get on the phone and you need to call to have these issues remedied before you proceed with your care, because you are now walking into the danger zone. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and here's to eliminating the stressors in your work life. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below, and we'd be glad to help you. So I just got a call to look at a patient's home. Actually, the person's going to be discharged from the hospital, and they want me to look at their home before I clean it. And I show up with this, and I show up with this. Why am I doing all this? Find out in today's episode. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about keeping yourself safe in your client's environment. Now, as you can see, I'm the man who comes in the suit, and people often say, well, you look like you're going in for surgery. Well, yeah, I'm going to go to operate today because your house is really in need of some deep, deep cleaning. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that are necessary in order for me, when I go in, to make sure that I'm not going to go into a toxic environment or a contaminated home and come out with a sickness. So one of the things that happens when I talk to caregivers who tell me that they have a client who's sick, or maybe a person has cancer. Of late, I had a client who had multiple sclerosis, and the offender in her home was actually her husband. Her husband stayed at home, but he was a chain smoker. People with multiple sclerosis need a clean environment because it will affect the neurological behavior in their brain. Particulate matter, especially from tobacco products, is going to be a problem to her being able to live in her own home. So they called me to come in to decontaminate and remove all the tobacco toxins from the walls, from the ceilings, from the windows, from all the furniture, and also we purify the air. But when I went there initially to the home, what I did was I had on my shoe covers and my protective gear. The person who was the smoker was there. He's like, oh wow, he's got on a mask. Well, yeah, I do put on a mask because I am very aware that I am not aware. And I'll say that again. I'm aware that I am not aware of what has gone on in that house before I arrive. So one of the things that I do if there's a problem with incontinence, and if it's maybe relegated to the sofa, is I'm concerned with not only cleaning the stain of urine leakage on the sofa, but also the bacteria that you will find lurking inside the urine, which will also be embedded in the sofa. And they will find a happy home right in the sofa, and you could sit there on that sofa not knowing that a person has leaked on that sofa, and then you're transporting these bacteria back to your home. You're transporting it to your car. If you sit down on that sofa, you take it back to your home. So this is a surface sterilization device that I use when I'm sterilizing mattresses. I not only clean the mattress with the steam cleaning machine, but also sterilize them afterwards, because you can never be too clean when you're talking about a person with multiple sclerosis or any type of health-threatening situation that the environment may cause an additional stress. My UV glasses, what I'll do is I'll put these ultraviolet light glasses on, and this will allow me to use an ultraviolet light, flashlight here, and I'll just do an inspection inside the home. Generally, I'll do the inspection during the nighttime so I can find if there are leakages of urine stains. It'll detect as a white spot, a bright white spot or speckles. And it'll let me know if there's mice urinating in the house, which is another problem. If the person who's living in the home has leaked urine in some place other than the most obvious places like the sofa or maybe in the mattress in the bed. And so when we're doing home environmental medicine, I'm staying mindful of the fact that the bacteria in the house is contained within the whole capacity of the home. And what generally happens when you have a caregiver, oftentimes their duties will include light cleaning. For me, light cleaning is fine if the house is already clean, but if the house is contaminated, the contamination travels through the entirety of the house. Part of what I do is I walk in, I'll wear my gloves, nice thick PVC type gloves that will allow me to handle items without having to have contact with my skin. There's not a major concern with something contacting my skin unless there's a breakage in my skin. It can enter into your system through your eyes or through your nose. Being mindful of that will allow you to take the proper precautionary measures. Another issue that home environmental medicine addresses is if you have a person who has MRSA, and that's something, it's a microorganism that will eat the skin, and it's very contagious, and it's a problem. It's difficult to kill, but ultraviolet light will kill it. If the person who has Staphylococcus infection scratches their skin and the skin shavings fall to the floor, the nurse doesn't know that they're on the floor. So as she's walking through the home, she's tracking the MRSA throughout the home. With home environmental medicine, you're creating an environment that will reinforce the strength of your own immune system without using toxins. So you want to make sure that your efforts are not going to be stifled in that environment while you're trying to provide care for your client in their home. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. What's the difference between intensive cleaning and maid service? Find out on today's episode. Okay, just recently I got a phone call from a maid service company because they had a job that they could not fulfill. Basically what happened was there was a fire in the house. The fire was in the basement. The fire in the basement distributed soot and smoke through the entire of the house to the degree that the lady who was the owner who lived there, she had to check into a hotel for 3 months because she couldn't tolerate the smell. When they called the maid service, they said, well, we can't accommodate you because we don't do that kind of work. Intensive cleaning addresses the microscopic aspects of the cleaning process where we're dealing not with just what is visual and pleasing, we're dealing with what is environmental and often off the radar, such as germ activity and microorganisms and their behaviors. So when we're dealing with the soot in the home, we deal with particulate matter that has been distributed throughout the entire house, which means that there's a certain percentage of the smoke or soot that is now stuck to the ceilings, is stuck to the walls. Even though it may not be visible, when you walk throughout the house, everywhere you go is smoke. As I went into the basement was where the fire happened, and they wanted the 2 upper levels cleaned first, so I suggest that first we're going to have to create a barrier between the basement door and the rest of the house so that you don't get the drift, because the air in your home moves throughout the home, and that's basically how it functions. So he had the suggestion that, well, maybe we can just in the basement poke some holes, like he said, like a 1-inch holes in a couple of the windows, and just let the air freshen up the space. So I grabbed the man and I took him over to a mirror. He and I stood in the mirror and we couldn't see ourselves. I said, the reason why you can't see yourself in the mirror is because it's covered with soot. Now, when the fire took place in the basement, the soot didn't go only to the mirror, it got distributed liberally through the entire house. So anywhere that your nose is detecting the odor of smoke, guess what? There are smoke particles. That's what you're smelling. So when you open the windows and open the doors and think you're airing out, it's the same with people who smoke cigarettes. The reason why the smell doesn't go away because the particles are sticking to the surfaces. So maid service doesn't really address broad surface cleaning such as ceilings, walls, and maybe they will address the floor. But if there has been a fire or smoke event or just accumulation of dust, the dust will layer the entire interior surface. If your neighbor's house caught fire, guess what? You need to purify the rooms in your house because the glues from the materials that were burnt next door are now in your house. And as I said earlier, if it's in your house, it's in your blood. If it's in your blood, it's going to get distributed to all of the organs in your body. And so intensive cleaning focuses on all of the areas that encompass and go beyond what the maid services will do. So the maid service, they will dust and vacuum and do some touch-up, but they won't necessarily pull the refrigerator out from the wall and see that it's never been cleaned back there since you moved in, and it's got accumulation of all types of stuff that's releasing odors. They also will not get inside of the cabinets in the kitchen where oftentimes if there's an infestation, ants or roaches or even bed bugs. As you can see, there's a big difference between maid service and intensive cleaning. As a matter of fact, the maid service companies call my services because they cannot do these jobs. They reject these jobs. It's beyond their skill set. It's beyond the scope of their responsibilities and their training. We do it with pleasure. We do it with expertise. So you don't have to feel that there's no solution and that maybe you call the maid service and they've rejected it, so you have to handle it on your own. It's not going to be doable because you're not aware and you don't have the adequate tools or the information that you need to get this home to be a safe environment. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and I cannot wait to make your home incredibly clean. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. When I come into your home and I'm dressed like this, what am I looking for? Find out in today's episode. So what am I looking for? I show up in your home, you gave me a call that your home needs to be cleaned, and I show up with this suit on and I've got this flashlight. This is an ultraviolet flashlight that will detect urine stains that could be the result of rodent activity in your home. It could be the result of incontinence from the person who lives in that home. And in order to clean that home, intensively clean, I've got to address every inch of the house. It's not sufficient enough for me to just spray one area, spray air freshener, and maybe just clean the surface of the bathroom. I can actually clean a bathroom and come back with the ultraviolet light and scan the entire toilet, and I can see all the areas where there's still residue from other cleaning agents still there. So that residue is what has been left from some other cleaning agent, and what's important for me to know is that there's something on the surface that needs to be addressed, because if someone has cleaned the home before I show up, I'm looking to see even if the cleaning products that they use are contaminant or toxic. People sometimes they clean with bleaches, sometimes they clean with ammonia. They've learned that to use bleach, and people were thinking, well, I can use bleach on everything, but bleach does not kill every microorganism. As a matter of fact, there's some microorganisms that actually can live for 2 years in a bottle of bleach. And so when we're looking at the bathtubs, we're looking at the floors, the surfaces, we're looking for stuff to clean. I go into a home and I'm looking for the dust. I'm looking for the stains. I'm looking for the smears. I'm looking for the odors. Also, what I would do is I would go along the edge of the wall and I would pull the furniture away from the wall. And you look on the back of the furniture. And what do you see on the back of the dresser drawers? Particles of dust accumulated, and those dust particles made of a combination of material. Also, what happens is those particles become part of the indoor air environment, and it may cause blood disorders. So one of the concerns that I have when cleaning the home for a person who's been hospitalized is, are they going to come home from the hospital procedure with their immune system somewhat compromised because of a surgery, and now they're going to end up with a blood disorder because the environmental dust has not been addressed. This is the difference between the maid service, and so the maid services find themselves challenged. I find also that the caregivers find themselves challenged when part of their work requires them to do light cleaning. But I always say that light cleaning is like going to the dentist and having them clean just one tooth. Your whole mouth is filthy, your whole mouth needs to be addressed. If you only clean that one tooth, you're going to miss the mark and they're going to be back again with the same problem. So the purpose of intensive cleaning in home environmental medicine is to bring that house to a high standard. This is going to be the starting point, and then you can bring the maid services in to maintain it. But what's going to happen, the maid services will generally not clean inside the stove. They generally will not dismantle some of the items in the home that need to be dismantled in order to be cleaned properly. They won't necessarily go inside the kitchen cabinets and clean the dishes, the plates, the glasses, the forks. If you have a home that has been experiencing smoke damage or fire damage, the particles get inside of the furniture. So when a maid service comes to clean, one of the things that is not necessarily on their radar is what's the activity that's taking place on the periphery of the house. You know, pull that furniture back from the wall, roll the carpet, the throw rugs, the area rugs back. Let's see what's going on down here. I was shocked, not that anything shocks me today, because I've seen it all after 25 years of going in so many different homes, but I pulled back the rug of a person who had a son who was a hoarder, and he lived in the basement, and we pulled back the rug and there's ants. They're just roaming around, and there's all types of little mealyworms and carpet beetles, and it's not on the radar. So if a maid service walks into that environment, generally what will happen is they will turn around and walk right out. And we get many of our caregivers who walk into an environment that is offensive to them and they just turn around and walk out. So I'm saying, do not walk out, pick up the phone, make the call, because the help is just one phone call away. But you need to know that home environmental medicine will make this home good for your health as a person who's working, and it'll also make that home good for the health of the person who you're taking care of. You call, I come. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and I want to get your home incredibly clean. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. Dust mites, bed bugs, fleas, ticks, roaches. I'm going to show you how to find them and get rid of them in today's episode. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and today we're talking about indoor environmental pests and how they may affect your ability to provide care in the outpatient home. One of the issues that people have been encountering are bed bugs, and they're a nuisance and they come with a lot of drama. They bring drama to the homes of the people that they're in. They bring drama to the visitors of people's homes because they can hitch a ride on your clothing, hitch a ride on your luggage, and they lay eggs, and it's quite a bit of a nuisance. So when we're dealing with bed bugs, there's always this situation where there's an extermination that has to take place, and when the exterminator comes to the house, what are they going to do to get rid of the bed bugs? Well, they're not going to collect them up in a little basket or a little net one by one. They're going to spray your house. You know, what they're going to spray your house with, they're going to spray it with poison. One of the situations that you have to be mindful of if you have a patient who has bed bugs or have encountered bed bugs in their environment is that if the exterminator comes and they spray the home with poisons, you are now in a poisonous environment. It's fine, well and good that the bed bugs are dead, but if the bed bugs have been treated with air spray, sometimes they'll use what they call a fogger. The residual of that fogger is poison. Anything, once again, that is in the air ends up in your body. The dust may fall to the floor, but it's still in the body. So that home has to be cleaned thoroughly of the residual dust of the poisons after the extermination. Otherwise, you're walking into a hazard to your blood chemistry. And that's very important, especially when a person's suffering from some type of an ailment where they need the whole system to work properly. If you have a toxin or chemical, or like a pesticide, in your blood, that means that your liver has to go into action to try to get rid of that toxin from your blood. So stress can be caused in the liver as a result of extermination. Another problem that comes with pests, for example, roach infestation. Some people have had roaches in their home, and everyone is not aware, but roach feces can actually cause people who are not asthmatic to become asthmatic. And so they breathe in the dust particles from the fecal matter. Keep in mind, it's feces, and it becomes dust particles that are commingled with your air. It can be transmitted through your HVA system. And if you go into a hoarded space and you're moving around the items in that house, guess what? You're kicking up the dust of what's on the bottom. What's on the bottom you don't get to see until you get to the bottom. So in my situation, I have to put on the hazmat and the mask to go in order to get to the bottom, to even clean what's down there. Sometimes I'll find a dead mouse, sometimes I'll find dead bugs, sometimes I'll find roaches. And one extreme case of a roach infestation was one where there was actually a lady who had passed away, but they needed now to sell the property. So I got contacted from the person who was her care provider, but in the condition that it was in, it was not market ready. And she had an infestation of roaches, and she had 6 cats. And the cats basically urinated throughout the house, and the cats didn't get out much. She was sickly herself, but the fecal matter of the roaches actually trailed up the wall and across the ceiling. You can actually see a visible trail across the ceiling of roach feces. So this makes this home a very environmentally hazardous site, not only for people who are coming in after that, but if they're trying to sell that house and they don't identify that this is a contaminant and they paint over top of it, you still have a problem. So with intensive cleaning, we're mindful that there may be insect activity in the home. Almost every home has some level of insect activity, but we want to be mindful, especially if they're being treated with pesticides, because pesticides are actually poisons. And we don't want to live in a home with a poison in exchange for living with a pest. So we have to address them both, and that's where we come in. We go in cracks and crevices and in between things, behind the mirrors, behind the pictures on the walls, where these things will find a habitation. If you got bugs, we'll find them, even if your maid services can't. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below, and we'll be glad to help you. If you're a professional in-home care provider and you walk across the threshold of someone's home, how do you feel? We're going to talk about that in today's episode. So what does the psychological impact mean when you're recovering from a procedure in your home? First of all, you're in your own home, which is fine, but now you need someone who's not a family member, in some cases, to come into your home to provide care for you. Now, this is going to be somewhat of a stress, even though the person is there to provide care for you. It's going to be a stress on their part and also a stress on your part, because you're both on territory that's not totally your own, so to speak. As a caregiver, when you go into a person's home, you have a psychological dimension that has to take in consideration the condition of the person that you're caring for and your ability to give adequate care to a person who is ailing, a person who's in distress, a person who is sick, a person who is trying to recover, and there's a certain amount of stress that is associated with that, which oftentimes makes it difficult for you to disconnect from your work. In order for a caregiver to give adequate care, they have to at some point be able to disconnect from their work psychologically. If the home that you're working in is experiencing all types of stress and you are actually experiencing or classifying these as stress events, there's a psychological impact that will impede your ability to work at your optimum level of energy. So I talk about the importance of your sleep environment as a caregiver, living in a person's home who you do not have the authority to move about as though it were your own home. You're going to have to get some help to address the issue. These issues are not brought to the forefront in a way that gets addressed. Sometimes they're swept under the rug, such as maybe it's a home and there's a water damage. They've got a leaky basement or a leaky faucet in the basement, and now they have a situation where there's mold, and this now becomes a stress event for you, and it's a psychological problem for you because you know that there's a potential that you could become ill in that environment. So there may be odors, there may be remnants of spillage. This is not what you're paid to do, this is not what you're hired to do, but if you're in that environment, you are now subject to the odors that accumulated in that chair. And from a psychological perspective, this is something that will take your focus away from caring for your client to self-care. Sometimes we have situations where there's hoarding activities taking place. This will have a psychological impact not only on your ability to focus on the client, but also it's an irritant that will not go away. The other thing in terms of psychology, which is actually to the benefit of the patient, patients actually tend to recover better when they're in their own home. So they want to age in place, they want to recover in their own home. When they're in their own home, they also have a certain sense of control and a certain sense of involvement in the process. To the degree that the patient feels that they have a certain level of control and input, this will relieve a certain amount of anxiety and stress that may be on the caregiver, because the person who's the patient will actually take a certain degree of the stress and responsibilities off of you because they feel a sense of self when they're in their home environment. And so for the caregiver, you have to, as much as possible, be able to psychologically detach the fact that you are in someone else's home under their control. So psychologically, though they may be there providing care for you, they're concerned about their health, and that is an irritant, and it's going to diminish the level of care and focus that they're actually going to be giving. So here's what you got to do. When you go into that home environment, you have to first of all take an assessment of how do you feel in that space. Okay, we know you don't own the space. It's the home of a person who's ill. The person needs your help. But when you walk through the threshold of that door, how is your energy flowing? Do you feel that you are energized and that you can go straight to provide care? Or does your attention directly go over to, oh, look at the cobwebs in the corner. Oh, look at the dust under the couch. Oh, look at the dust on the furniture. Oh, there's odors here. What you need to do is make a real assessment of what is it that you're detecting in that space. And if it's something that needs to be addressed that's above and beyond your capacity, you need to make the call. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and here's to keeping you incredibly healthy. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below, and we'd be glad to help you. So if you have a client who has mobility issues, they're obese or vision impaired, I bet they don't have a clue of what's lurking inside their home and behind the things that they cannot reach. Let's talk about that in today's episode. One of the segments of our population that I found have been somewhat overlooked when it comes to in-home cleaning are the demographics of the people who have mobility issues or vision impairment issues. People with mobility issues who may be having a walker or wheelchair, or they're driving in a scooter, are not going to be in a position to be able to reach certain areas in the home that will accumulate dust or accumulate germs and bacteria. So with that in mind, that's a whole category of people who at times need care, but because they are not able to do certain things, it creates a hazard that's ongoing in their space. One of the things I know for sure is that if a person is needing to get around in a scooter, they're also not going to be in any position to move furniture and clean behind furniture. They won't be able to clean windows and reach up high, clean curtains and things of that nature. All of these things will impact their health. Even though their issue may be mobility related, they have a tendency to have an environment that just has not and cannot be cleaned unless someone from outside actually comes into that space. I do have a story of a lady who was she's actually has hoarding issues, but she's also, she's not able to walk, so she has a scooter that gets her around. And one of the challenges that she has is that there are things on the countertops that she can reach, things that she's placed there, but she cannot thoroughly clean her shower. There's certain areas on the floor that she cannot clean because of the footprint of her actual scooter will occupy the space, will prohibit her from actually cleaning underneath certain items, and this becomes a hazard, especially when we talk about, once again, infestations of dust or mice activity. A rodent will enter into a place where a person has maybe a mobility issue and the droppings that they leave behind don't get addressed. One of the things I talk about is identifying mouse droppings. People sometimes are not able to identify what it actually is when they see a mouse dropping. So I say, well, brown rice, yes. Black rice, no. If it looks like rice and it's black, it's feces from a rodent, and that carries with it its own type of bacteria, and disease can fester inside there as well as in the urine of the mouse. So if you're a person with a mobility issue, the likelihood that you are going to even be able to see the mouse droppings on a countertop are very slim to none. Some of the hazards that people have if they have pets and they have mobility issues, that is, if there is a mouse infestation in the household, mice have entered into the home and they defecate along the perimeters of the home, the cats can actually pick up the dust from the urine, which could carry the bacteria, and when they lick their pads, then now the mice are vectors for the disease. Cats can have their own type of bacteria that can make the environment unsafe for you, especially if you're pregnant, and there's something called C. diff. People are pretty much aware that this comes from the droppings from a cat, a litter box that may not be changed as frequently as it should. So when a person has issues with, for example, vision, same situation applies, that if there's a mouse infestation, they don't get to see the mice running around the house. If the mouse is dropping droppings behind the furniture, along the edges of the wall, if they're urinating up on the countertops, then what happens is this goes off the radar because they can't see it. If you're a caregiver and you have a patient who is wheelchair bound, or maybe they're in a scooter, or they're walking with a walker, or they have a vision impairment, or maybe they're totally blind, it's worth it to give us a call so we can come out and do a thorough evaluation and assessment of the healthiness of that home, because these things will not be attended to from their prompting. They will not give you any indication that you need to do any of that stuff because they're not aware that these things could be problematic. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and here's to keeping your patients and your team incredibly healthy. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. Why are you or your patients being readmitted to the hospital? And what does it have to do with the cleanliness of your home? Find out in today's episode. One of the things that caught my attention in the early days of cleaning was an encounter that I had with my first client, and she was suffering from a disease called scleroderma. It's a rare skin disease, but it's a skin disease where the skin actually starts to dry out to the point where they have to start cutting off the extremities because the circulation is not going through. So there was a lady and she had this situation. I felt bad for her. She was not able to open containers to do cleaning, and anything that she handled with her fingertips was excruciating in terms of pain for her. And she had asked me if I would help her to clean her house. And of course I said, it's not gonna kill me to help this lady. She needs help, let me step up and help this lady. At the end of the day, I overheard her complimenting my work to someone on the phone, and she said, oh, there's a young man here. He's detailing my chandelier. Wow, my chandelier's never been so clean in my life. The house hasn't been this clean since I moved in. And I said to myself, this is something that I should not take lightly. I should pay attention to this. So when we talk about community health, one of the things that catches my attention is the healthiness of the community in their own private space. When a person gets discharged from the hospital, they go back to their private space. But if their private space is not managed well in terms of bacteria count, dust count, and just the general maintenance of the home, all homes will deteriorate systematically over a period of time, and they have to be upkept and maintained in order to keep this deterioration from becoming a problem with the entire community. When people get discharged into homes that are contaminated, they end up back in the hospital. And so there's been like a revolving door of people coming from a contaminated home into a hygienically clean environment, which is the hospital, where it's governed by OSHA. The nurses and the doctors, they provide service and care in a hygienically clean environment. And then when they get discharged, it's back to the contamination, and then they end up right back in the hospital again. Another issue that can contribute to readmission rates when we talk about the health of the community is that when you have a senior or sickly person who has some type of illness or injury that now prohibits them from climbing the stairs. And it could be a case where they're creating now a sleeping environment on the ground level so they don't have to go up and down the stairs, which requires construction work. When the construction work is done in the house, the people who do the construction, the sanding of the floors, the hammering, the sheetrock installation, they do not specialize in the cleanup. They may do a builder's level of clean, which is very generic, but in terms of particulate matter that's left as a residual of their work, it lingers on and it becomes a toxic hazard. I have had situations where a lady had a knee operation, and because of the knee operation, they created a bed for her on her ground floor. So she wasn't going to be sleeping in her bedroom, she was going to be sleeping in the den off of the kitchen. But while she was in the hospital, the basement was being remodeled. She was a person who did crafts work, and so they remodeled the entire basement with the idea that when she's recovering, at some point she can go back into her shop and start doing some of her crafts. The problem was the sawdust travels through the air. As the air is a vehicle for all particles to move about, she found that she was not able to sleep through the night because her nose was running continuously, her eyes were irritated, her throat was scratchy. Construction work and remodeling can actually add to the hospital admission rates because some of the material that are used in newly refurbished homes can off-gas. And off-gassing will actually produce glues and toxins, respiratory effects, that can cause neurological damage. And then before we know it, now she's broken her hip and they've remodeled a bedroom for her on the main level. They've done some construction and installation, and now they sent her back to that home, and now she's back at the hospital again. What's the problem this time? It's not her hip, it's her lungs. Okay, what's in the lungs? It's the residue from the construction work. So this is something that has to be addressed, and it has to be on the radar of the caregivers and the case managers, the people who are involved in discharge planning, that if you're going to reconstruct an environment for that person to live in their home, you have to go through a thorough cleaning of the residual dust and debris, the glues, and the toxins. So here's what you need to do. If you're a patient or you're caring for a patient and you don't want to get readmitted to the hospital because your home was not intensively cleaned, it's time to take care of it now. I'm the incredible Gregory Hunter, and here's to keeping you healthy. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below, and we'd be glad to help you. You're caring for your loved one, but who's caring for you? Let's talk about it in today's episode. What I've found to be the case in most families is that at some point in time there's somebody in your home to be cared for. It could be the grandmom, it could be great uncle, it could be maybe a child with special needs. But at some point, each one of us will either be giving care or will need care. And it's a daunting task, and it also comes with a lot of stress, and it also comes with a lot of heartache. Their families in many communities who they try to handle it all on their own, which makes this challenge even greater for them because they're not aware oftentimes that there are services that are available. And then secondly, they are not aware of the things that need to be done because they're not professional caregivers, so they don't have access or the knowledge that they would get from a professional trained caregiver. So some of the people I've seen, which is basically really struck a nerve with me, was a 14-year-old girl whose mother was a diabetic and she was dying from the disease and she was wheelchair bound, and it was just a 14-year-old daughter, and she dropped out of high school and she's coming home and not going to school. She's just taking care of her mother all day and she doesn't really know what to do. She's not a healthcare professional, so she's managing as well as she can. But they had another problem because the mother was divorced. They were living in squalor. The home was absolutely filthy, and they had a guard dog, which was a large German Shepherd, and the dog was having run of the house. He was defecating all throughout the house. This is a situation where this family is in one crisis and they're also creating another crisis, and they're not aware. I've seen that in more than one case where there's a family member who's doing the best that they can with the resources that they are aware of or the resources that they have, and they're really being challenged and in some cases traumatized. They're overwhelmed with trying to do the best that they can to care. And the last thing that actually gets done is the cleaning. The home actually doesn't get done. So when the person feels overwhelmed, things just fall off the radar. Sometimes there's dementia that comes into our families, and sometimes there are other diseases that will impair a person's judgment, impair their sensibilities. This becomes a level of stress for a person who's a family member who's doing the best that they know how, but they don't have any training in those medical diseases. There's many aspects to dementia. It takes a person who's skilled and trained in those areas to even identify when it is that your loved one doesn't no longer recognize who you are and thinks that you're an intruder in their home and that you're handling them, you're touching them. So what doesn't happen in these environments is that the house doesn't get cleaned. These are types of things that will wear a family member who's providing care for a loved one. It will wear you out totally and completely to the point where now you're not thinking properly, you're making bad decisions because the stress is wearing out your ability to think clear. And the environmental hazards that accumulate are going to exacerbate the trauma that you're having, and more likely you're going to find yourself in the hospital needing care while you're trying to provide care. I tell people, well, if you get your house intensively cleaned, it doesn't have to be intensively cleaned every day. So these are some of the challenges that caregivers who are non-professionals are facing, but at the same time, when a caregiver who is a professional goes into a home, say for example you're a social worker, you don't have a track record of any of the activity that preceded your coming to that home. So if there's hoarding activities going on and they had exterminations come in the past, you don't have any record of that. So when you're walking into that environment, you have a lot to consider. So caregivers have to be mindful that they are vulnerable to be a stroke candidate if they're caring for a loved one and the house is not being cleaned, because you're accumulating toxins, you're accumulating dust particles, and if they don't get addressed, they're going to show up somewhere in your health because they're showing up in your body. They're going to be in your lungs, it's going to be in your blood, it's going to be in your nose. And so these are some of the issues that caregivers have when they're trying to care for a loved one. So if you're in this kind of situation and you're not the only one, here's the thing to think about. There's a service that's available, we provide it. Reach out to us and let us know that you need the service, you need an inspection. We'll show up pronto to take care of you, to keep you safe and keep your family safe. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you. One of the things that I make sure to do is to inform my caregivers about the environments that they're going into. They will give me a call to do a walkthrough assessment of an environment for one of their clients. And the main thing that I like to do before I go in is to make sure that they know to protect themselves and how to protect themselves before they go into that unknown environment. One of the most important things I tell them is that make sure that you put on some shoe covers. These are for your protection. They're designed to not necessarily keep your shoes looking nice, but they're designed to separate and create a barrier between the bottom of your sole and the actual environment that you're walking in. So once you put that shoe cover on, you can rest assured that at the end of your tour through that person's site, that you can remove the cover without bringing whatever you're picking up on your shoes back to your car, back to your home, back to the next site. And that's very important. Also, when people are going into hoarded environments, it's the same thing that when you have an accumulation of dust, accumulation of items and different objects that have been stationary for a long period of time, you have also accumulation of dust in activity that has taken place that's on the bottom of the stack. So it wouldn't be unusual for me to go doing a decluttering, a decontamination of a home that's cluttered, to find at the bottom of the piles of debris dead mice, dead spiders, fecal matter from rodents, urine stains from rodents. You see things that they've chewed up, and there's food spillage and waste. All those things are potential hazards or access ways for transmission of disease. And as you're walking through those sites, you don't have any indication of what is actually there. So shoe covers, definitely on the feet. Also masks we put on to cover your nose and mouth from anything that you may loosen up into the air when you're moving these items. Even sometimes the homes are difficult just to navigate through. And you may find yourself having to move and shuffle some of the things, items out of the way. And in the process of you doing that, you're going to release the dust that has fallen on these items that have been sitting there for God knows how long. And this can be something that will end up inside of your lungs, of course, because you're breathing when you're in that space. So cover your mouth, cover your shoes, and then also, thirdly, cover your hands. I advise people to wear latex gloves, or if they have rubber gloves, that's fine. Once you get inside the resident's home, the doorknobs could be dirty. The doorknobs could be infected. The light switches can have filth on them. Sometimes people put their hands on the door to push the door open. So you want to be mindful that you don't necessarily want to touch any of the items there, but you want to make sure that you get a chance to make an accurate assessment of what you see there. I had a job that I did an evaluation for, I guess it was maybe 4 or 5 months ago. The situation was the lady had cancer. She had cancer in her uterus. And as a result of her having cancer in the uterus, she lost blood in her bed. She lost blood on the carpet, throughout the bathroom. And you can see where she's been struggling in that home because she lived alone. And she's struggling to get to the bathroom and struggling to get through the house. And wherever things got spilled, that's where they got spilled. And she did not have the energy nor the mental capacity to understand that she's now creating a potential health hazard for herself from her own body. So going into environments where there's been spillages of blood, leakages from your stool, leakages from your bladder, it could be an epidemic waiting to happen if you don't go in and protect yourself properly. You don't want to take that to another patient's home if they have cancer or some other type of disease where the immune system is weakened, because they're very vulnerable. And so protecting yourself is the most important thing that you do when you make your assessment. So put the shoe covers on. It doesn't hurt to put them on. People kind of think it's interesting that when I show up, I put my shoe covers on, and I let them know that I'm protecting myself from you. Not that I have anything against you, but I don't want to have a situation where I cannot provide care for you because I've now become sick in your home. And so the work that I do has a certain level of risk involved. It's actually a high level of risk because I'm going into unknown environments that have unknown levels of a microscopic or microorganic activity involved. The equipment and supplies that I use, some of the chemicals that I use also, are designed to eradicate 99.9% of all types of microorganisms that may be either in the air or on the surfaces. So I use air and surface purification devices, and I use products that will actually clean the surfaces from the debris. So I'm advising and recommending that you protect yourself, just as I will always protect myself when I'm going into that environment to make it safe and healthy for you and for your patient. This is not maid service, this is intensive cleaning. So reach out to us with the information below and we'd be glad to help you.